Thank you for joining us. I'm Kyle Clark. So there's an open race for Denver District Attorney for the first time since 2017. With no Republican running, the Democratic primary will likely decide the race. I'm joined by the candidates for a joint conversation about the stakes and that race. Leora Joseph, John Walsh, thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
So just to let folks know, this is not a formal debate. There's going to be no opening and closing statements. We're not timing your answers or anything like that. But we wanted you to come in together so that we can help voters decide by hearing where you agree and disagree. So if you agree, just say so, we'll move on. And if you disagree, please ask to be heard or jump in so that voters can get that differentiation.
Absolutely.
Both of you have had long careers as prosecutors, and I haven't heard anybody suggest that either of you are not qualified to do the job. But I'd like to ask each of you to begin with something in your background that you think particularly well suits you to be the Denver DA, an experience or a skill that you think that the other one does not have. John Walsh.
So I would start off with the fact that I was the United States Attorney for Colorado during the Obama administration and ran that office located here in Denver with prosecutors really with responsibility for the entire state. And that experience was both managing the office internally, but also looking outside and dealing with stakeholders, with the community, and the broader issues that were facing the entire state. And I think that really is an incredibly important distinguishing factor because that's exactly what the DA of Denver has to do. Not only run the office internally, but have that relationship as a prosecutor with the various affected communities and other government stakeholders.
Leora Joseph.
Yeah, so I think what makes me unique in this race is not the 20 years or so that I've been a prosecutor leading change in DA's offices, but the work that I'm doing now for the governor's administration, leading the largest state agency that handles behavioral health as it intersects with the court system, especially the criminal justice system. I run an agency that has about 1,800 employees and a $350 million budget. It's a high-level management job focused on solutions. And right now, I think Denver's in the middle of a mental health crisis, and I think the solutions lie there. It looks like a public safety crisis, but a lot of what we're seeing is mental health.
So you do have that difference in your records in that a lot of your work has been at the federal level, a lot of your work has been at the state, the local level in prosecution. Does that matter?
I think it does. I think being a lawyer is a specialization, and being a DA is a special skill set, and that's what I've been doing for over 20 years in DA's offices. It's different kind of crimes. It's working with local agencies. It's working on local management, and I think it does matter that I've worked in the DA's office for over 20 years.
Does it put you at a disadvantage?
No, I don't think it does. And it's important to realize what the U.S. Attorney's Office does. The U.S. Attorney's Office not only handles the sort of bigger drug investigations and white-collar cases, but also in Colorado actually does act as the district attorney for our two Indian reservations. And so many of the same sorts of cases come to the U.S. Attorney's Office. I'd also say that when I started as an assistant U.S. attorney, I did an incredibly broad range of cases, from assaults and bank robberies to just an incredible variety of things. And so I don't think the role is that different. And I'll also say something else. You know, as U.S. Attorney, I worked very closely with the Denver District Attorney's Office and other District Attorney's Office on mutual questions of public safety. That included violent crime and drug dealing and other issues. And that cooperation meant that I worked directly with the Denver Police Department, with the DA's office. And I think it's for that reason that, you know, all three Denver district attorneys who are currently with us have endorsed my candidacy because they know me, they've worked with me, they know I can do the job.
So a lot of your work would be overseeing the work of others and guiding it. But I think people are curious about your individual experiences as a prosecutor. Leora Joseph, when was the last time that you personally prosecuted a violent crime case?
Yes, my last trial was during the pandemic. I remember because we were still wearing masks for part of our openings and closings. So about 2020, maybe 21, it was a rape of a child case, and I did that in Arapahoe County.
John Walsh, when was the last time you personally prosecuted a violent crime case?
So I've prosecuted cases over my entire career, including most recently in October of last year, just before I entered this race. But the last time I personally prosecuted a violent crime was back when I was an assistant U.S. attorney in Los Angeles. So it's been a long time. I supervised...
Roughly when, year-wise?
In the mid-90s, so
okay.
Yeah, so quite a while. But at the same time, I supervised an office that was constantly prosecuting violent crimes during that entire time I was U.S. attorney, and that's what the Denver DA does as well.
If I could just add to that, even in my management roles, it was always important for me to be in court. Obviously, my caseload was not the same as most of the line deputies, but I felt it was important to see how the lawyers were experiencing new technology in the courtroom, how different judges react to different pieces of evidence, and new case law as it comes down. So those were important things for me to keep doing.
You mean being in the courtroom or actually being the lead prosecutor on a case?
Being a lead prosecutor on a case.
Okay, is that something you would still do as Denver DA, or is that not feasible?
I don't think that's feasible. I love trying cases. I would love to get to a point maybe in a few years where I could do that again and maybe try one case every 3 years. I would love that, but I don't think that's the job, and I don't think that's realistic.
And I would just add, I agree, it's critically important to be in the courtroom. And as U.S. Attorney, I was in the courtroom with the people in the office. I wasn't in a position to be the lead prosecutor, just like Leora is saying, but I was actively involved, arguing appeals, being in front of the court, and that's something I would do as Denver DA as well.
Leora Joseph, you have an ad that's running right now that says that you are the only candidate who will prosecute crimes, not ignore them. What specifically in Mr. Walsh's record or his policy proposals suggests that he will ignore crimes?
Yeah. So, Kyle, I think the issue here is about change and change management. And I'm running on significant change, which means prosecuting all crimes.
Which one specifically will he ignore? Because that's the claim made in your ad.
Correct. So the issue here is that the current administration, which has endorsed him and which talks about the same policies, his adoption of the same policies, has not been prosecuting low-level felonies and misdemeanors, and I plan to address those and prosecute those.
But again, your ad's not talking about the current administration. You're in a race against him, and you're saying you're the only candidate who will prosecute crimes and not ignore them. You have information to believe that he's going to ignore crimes.
I think that continuing on the legacy of the current district attorney, which has been part of the platform, is a legacy of ignoring crimes.
I'd like to ask you to speak directly to that.
So I'm not going to ignore crime. I got into this race because I was concerned about the direction Denver was heading on community safety issues. I am not just status quo. The entire point of my campaign is to bring new vigor, new energy, a new approach to how we go about addressing the pretty significant community safety problems that we've been facing these last 4 years. So the notion that I'm somehow ignoring crime is just not the case. That's not going to happen.
But that said, you're not calling for the sweeping change in the office that your opponent is. And I know you bristle at the idea that you only want to do incremental change or that you're essentially a status quo candidate from the current DA. Mm-hmm. But what is the significant change that you want to make?
I think the significant change that I would bring is the style of leadership that I've got and a focus on the specific issues that we're facing today. So that means a stubbornly high violent crime rate and youth violence. It means the ongoing fentanyl crisis that we're looking at and our car theft and catalytic converter theft issues. Those things are things where I believe we need to redirect the office to use the best tools available to make sure we're addressing each of those, and that in a matter of a couple of years, we're going to look back and say, you know what, we actually got a handle on that. We're in a much better place than we were. That emphasis is exactly the approach I took as U.S. Attorney with great success, and I'll do the same in the DA's office.
To get to one of the specifics you mentioned, I think there's a general perception in Denver, at least the knock on the current DA, is that if your car gets stolen in Denver, which a couple of years ago was at like nationally high levels, it's coming down now, but the idea is that if your car in Denver gets stolen, you're basically SOL, right? What are the police going to do? Because it's not going to get prosecuted. Yeah. You would change that?
I would. I absolutely would. And on a couple of different levels. One thing I think that's important for people to understand is that there's actually an organized crime aspect to the wave of car thefts that we've seen. And that's something I think we need to address head on with the best investigative tools and longer term investigation to take down rings entirely and have a big impact. We also need to work with the city. There's a city task force focused on car theft. There should be a DA's office task force that works hand in hand with the police and the city to make sure that these things get handled. And I'll also say, we need to have an environment where the police department knows that when there's been a car theft, the DA's office is going to back them up if they actively investigate and get to the bottom of it.
Leora Joseph, let me ask you, you worked in the Denver DA's office under Beth McCann in 2017 for all of 4 months, which feels like it's either a pretty big red flag about Beth McCann's DA's office or you. Can you explain to voters which it is?
Sure. I came into that office at the beginning of DA McCann's tenure, and I think there was a lot of tumult. We definitely did not see eye to eye on issues of change, best practices in DA's office, public safety. At the same time, I got offered a very big job as Chief of Staff to the Colorado Attorney General and doing projects that really matter a lot to me. And that was a unique opportunity for me to lead a 500-person office. So I took that.
So about the idea of hopping from job to job, you have said that you will not seek another elected office
Correct.
beyond Denver DA.
100%.
What about you?
I don't expect to seek any other office. I am at a point in my career where I got into this race because I love the city. I've spent almost my entire life here, and this is the job I want to do. You know, you get 3 terms before you're termed out, and that would put me in a place to retire. So I'm done.
Okay. Would both of you be open to seeking a 3rd term? Our mayor has said that he doesn't think that mayors should serve 3 terms, so he won't seek a 3rd term. Thoughts on seeking a 3rd term briefly?
You know, I would seek a 3rd term if it makes sense at that point, and that's based on my experience in the U.S. Attorney's Office. Sometimes it takes a while to change the culture of an office.
I would hope to seek a 3rd term, hoping that the changes I've been able to make are sustainable, that people are feeling Denver is in a better place, that we've really cut back on our recidivism, that people feel safer downtown. Those are some of the changes I hope to make. And if I'm able to do that, yes, I will seek a 3rd term.
Another change question, then I want to talk about some of the biggest issues that are facing the city. Leora, Joseph, you said at a candidate forum that you're going to do everything differently. And my question is that hyperbole? Is that bluster? Or are you serious about doing everything differently? And what type of disruption would that cause?
Thank you. I am serious about doing everything differently. I think we need to look at what are best practices in DA's offices and how do we implement them. Change management is important, and it's important to have broad vision. So I'll give you some examples of some of the things I'd like to do. One, and first and foremost, I want to implement the community prosecution model. That's a model where you assign prosecutors to each different police district. They are then working hand in hand together on all of those cases, and are also the prosecutors have to be responsible and responsive to that whole neighborhood. Who are the faith leaders in that community? Who are the mental health workers? Who are the principals of the school? Making sure we're all talking constantly. So that's a massive, massive change. It also brings up and highlights the need for what I call vertical prosecution. I don't call it, that's what it's called, vertical prosecution, which is the same prosecutor and the same police officer are working on a case from the moment of arrest until the completion of the case. You don't face that broken telephone problem where information gets transmitted and it doesn't completely. Currently, the structure is an intake unit or an intake deputy. I don't think that's best practices.
Can I ask you, the current DA, Beth McCann, says that it's not feasible to do what you're talking about and that people would logistically be running all over the place, and it just simply does not work in an office the size of Denver.
Yeah. So when it manages to work in other offices that are larger. But what I will tell you is when I came to the Arapahoe DA and I did that, was pretty firm on that model for sex crimes, domestic violence, human trafficking, and elder abuse crimes, I was told the same thing. Impossible to do. People will be running all over. It'll be chaos. You know what happened? I met with the judges. I met with the clerks. I met with the staff. And we made it work. And it was really, really successful. And we had great outcomes for prosecutors, but more importantly for victims. That has to be the focus. Passing cases off is never the best answer.
So whichever of you is elected is going to join an office in which most of the folks in the office don't change with the changing of a DA, and they've been there doing work for a long time. When you say that you are going to do everything differently, that sounds to me like you're denigrating the work of the people who have been there. And if I hear that message, we're going to do everything differently, I'm looking at the exit.
God forbid. I don't mean to denigrate that office. I do think that when people talk about change, the natural inclination is to feel like you're attacking me, you're criticizing me, and that's not the case. Saying that we can do things differently doesn't mean that what you're doing is wrong. It means we need to do things differently. We need to look at outcomes and what's working and what's not. And the reality right now in Denver is public safety isn't working. And so we have got to do things differently, even if it might hurt someone's feelings. If you think that it's, an employee might say, that hurts my feelings that you're saying that. I am confident that there are a lot of people that do want to do things differently at the DA's office, actually, and are open to learning.
John Walsh, what do you think is the biggest public safety challenge facing the city? And give me one big idea to tackle it.
So can I just say one thing about changing everything?
Briefly, please. And then, and then
I'll
we'll
be very brief. I don't see how you can change everything until you actually understand what's going on in the office. And that's the experience I had as U.S. Attorney. You have to fix the things that need to be fixed and not mess with the things that are not broken. So that's a key point. I think the idea of changing everything or doing everything differently is a political slogan, not a reality in terms of managing an office effectively. So to go to your question, what is the single biggest problem that we're facing? Look, we've got multiple issues, as I've already talked about. But I would tell you the thing that is most on my mind is violent crime and the uptick in youth violence in our city. The way I would approach that is to make sure that the DA's office is working incredibly closely with the federal side, the U.S. Attorney's Office, to identify that small group of people who are actually pulling triggers and make sure that they get taken off the street for community safety. And this is so important, and couple that with an aggressive community-oriented approach to give alternatives to young people so that they don't get pulled into gang violence, so they don't feel like they need to take a pistol to school for their own protection. And that's something that the DA's office can help catalyze, working with the city, and really importantly, working directly with the community.
So reading between the lines, I hear tougher sentences for youth offenders, including getting the feds involved on what are essentially kids committing crimes.
Well, no, I wouldn't put it quite that way. What I would tell you is identifying those people who are actual dangers to the community and getting them off the street. Sometimes those are adults, right, who are getting kids involved in violence. That's where we have to be tougher. We also need to look at kids and look at how they're involved in violence and approach each of those cases very carefully. But we're in a situation where, we've got kids with guns. That's a disaster waiting to happen, no matter what the intent of the individual kid is, self-defense or some kind of more aggressive approach. We have to look at this as a whole. We have to work with the schools. We have to work with the community to change that dynamic, just like other cities have successfully done.
Leora, Joseph, biggest public safety challenge facing the city, one big idea to tackle it.
Yeah, I think we have two parallel issues, Kyle, to be honest. One is the violent crimes, the gun violence, the gang violence, the youth violence. We have to handle that. At the same time, we're seeing this massive uptick in dysregulated behavior as a result of mental illness and drug addiction, which is leading people to cause low-level crimes. Both of these things are causing Denver to feel not like Denver. And the two different parallel tracks I'll take is, first of all, on the violent crimes, I think we need to have a dedicated gun unit. I think we need to move those cases through the system, hold people accountable. At the same time, we need to be working with disruptors, people who can come into the office, and that's part of my community engagement plan, who are not prosecutors and not police, who understand gang violence, who understand gun violence, and can help advise me and the office how we can look and understand things differently to find real solutions. On the mental health piece, that's where the work I'm doing now is so critical, allowing us to change things in the court system to move people into treatment. So we're getting people the help they need, but also causing that sense of dysregulation and public safety that people talk about when they come visit Denver. We can make that go away.
I have a question for each of you on this, and this feels like a brief answer, but you will determine that.
We're not great with brief.
I want to ask you each about an endorsement, not that you received, but that your opponent received. Leora, Joseph, why do you think the outgoing DA, Beth McCann, has endorsed your opponent instead of you?
Yeah, I think she's endorsed him because he is going to continue her legacy. And she recently wrote that in an email to her supporters, encouraging them to support him. She said specifically that he's going to continue her office, and that is important to her. And I think that is, and she knows I'm running on change.
John Walsh, why do you believe the police union endorsed Ms. Joseph?
I have an excellent relationship with so many police officers, and I care about that relationship. And I think it's crucially important the DA's office has a good relationship, a strong communication with the police department. But I'll tell you, I think I come across as the independent person that I am, having been U.S. Attorney. And they didn't tell me why they didn't endorse me, but I will be firm, fair, and neutral in assessing cases that might relate to officers, and that may be what are their concerns.
So if the police union is behind you, what can we see in your record, not just your words? Perhaps you've never been in this position, but what in your record demonstrates a willingness to prosecute law enforcement when they violate the rights of citizens?
Sure. So I have prosecuted law enforcement. I've worked with law enforcement and I've prosecuted law enforcement. And I really believe that it's possible to support people and hold them accountable at the same time. I've prosecuted police officers who've committed violent acts of domestic violence and sexual assault. And I've also filed multiple internal affairs investigations when things didn't rise to the level of a crime, but I had serious concerns about behavior. So I've been able to do that my whole career, while at the same time being able to answer the call at 2 in the morning, approving a search warrant or whatever it is.
Have you ever prosecuted a law enforcement officer for an action they took on the job as opposed to off the job?
I have not.
Okay. John Walsh, Denverite reports that during your time as U.S. Attorney for Colorado, you never initiated a federal prosecution of a law enforcement officer for violating a civilian's civil rights. Is that because no law enforcement officers violated Coloradan civil rights while you were in charge, or did you just choose not to prosecute them for it?
So this is an issue I've worked on for decades. I was actually on Denver's Public Safety Review Commission back 20 years ago, which was the civilian oversight of law enforcement. It's an issue I care deeply about, but I think it's crucially important to understand what the process is for those sorts of investigations. The DA's office has the principal responsibility for assessing whether or not there's been excessive force or an unjustified shooting by a police officer. If the DA's office does not prosecute, it sometimes comes to the Department of Justice, but doesn't normally come to the U.S. Attorney's Office directly. It goes to the Civil Rights Division in Washington, D.C., which is a group of people who specialize in these prosecutions all across the country and take the laboring oar. They investigate a case. They work, granted, with the U.S. Attorney as local liaison, and make determinations. And when they come in with a conclusion, we conclude that there's not a basis to proceed. While I was U.S. Attorney, and I come to this with some humility, I would defer to them. As I look back on that, should I, as U.S. Attorney, have been more forceful in asking questions, pushing harder, making sure that I, in fact, agreed that that was the appropriate result? Yes. And would I do it differently today? I think I would. But at the time, we were deferring to the experts at the national level for the investigation and for those decisions.
Leora, Joseph, a question for you. You've said that you're going to hire a director of police accountability to advise your prosecutors on what community's perspective is on policing so that you can make decisions based on facts. Which decisions? Would you be making charging decisions based on what the community thinks?
It's not about what the community thinks, it's about a lens. And it's important to understand officer-involved shootings. This would be the focus of the role, to understand the dynamics, the lens, the context. I think those are some really important questions. And I think it's a part of transparency. It's a part of really having communication to understand how people think about things differently. And I think that someone who spent their career in law enforcement like myself may not understand an officer-involved shooting in the same way that someone from maybe a Black and brown community and how it affects them. And I think that is a really important piece to understand how these things affect community when you make decisions.
I guess I want to just make sure that I fully understand this. What specifically would be the decisions that you would be making based on what is essentially public opinion?
No, then I haven't explained it well.
Okay.
A decision made on a case has got to be about the facts and the law as it applies. How we think about things, though, does have to be influenced by how community feels, how we understand a context, how we have to understand why someone might run away from a police officer, for example, why someone may not have felt comfortable exiting a car. Those are things that are really based on cultural competency. And I think we need to be thoughtful of those when we make our decisions and decide self-defense, no self-defense, those kinds of decisions.
So brings us to this. You've both been asked to weigh in publicly on the murder case against Stefan Long, which is a case that we've covered here. Community members say that he was just defending himself when he was attacked along the side of I-25, and they want the charges against him dropped. There's been a lot of pressure on the DA to drop the charges. John Walsh, you've said that it's inappropriate to weigh in on the details of a case that you might handle as DA. Why is that?
For a couple of reasons. First of all, I don't actually have the file and I don't have all of the evidence. So for me to weigh in at this point just based on public reports would be weighing in on incomplete information. In addition to that, I read our rules of professional responsibility, the obligations of a lawyer and the obligations of a prosecutor, to say pretty clearly that a lawyer should not be commenting on the guilt or innocence of someone who's accused. And given the fact that I expect that that case will be pending when I actually take office, it is crucially important that I not say anything now that would tie my hands or create issues when the moment comes to make decisions when I arrive.
Leora, Joseph, you have also said that it would be inappropriate to weigh in on the case, and then seconds after saying that, you weighed in on the case. You raised questions about how it was handled by the current DA, whether the current charges are appropriate. Why is it appropriate for you to take public positions on a case that might come before you as DA?
So I need to review the facts, absolutely. That's the beginning part, and I have not done that. What is in the public information and where I have concerns is the public record and what the process has been. Last night I was at a community meeting on East Colfax, and DA McCann herself spoke about both the Stefan Long case and another case where someone was charged with murder, which is the most serious crime that we can charge someone, held in custody, and then all of a sudden, months later, the case is just dismissed. That says to me we have a process problem. That says to me we're not doing vertical prosecution. That says to me we missed some steps up at the beginning. We better be pretty clear. When we charge someone with first-degree murder and hold them without bond, that we have a strong case.
Do you acknowledge, though, that you're at least walking a fine line when you opine on a case that is ongoing? I mean, we've got a district attorney in Colorado who lost murder charges because she was out talking about the case in an inappropriate way, Linda Stanley. She may soon lose her license for doing that, among other things. You essentially have the collapse of an entire DA's office because you had a DA who liked to make public pronouncements about cases.
I'm raising a public pronouncement about a process that I'm concerned about. And I think that is part of transparency and part of how we talk about things. And last night, DA McCann herself talked about those two things. Two cases, one is not pending and one is the Stefan Long, and talked about those exact things about the process. That one charge was dismissed and the other one was actually dismissed as well.
Question for both of you. You've both talked about rebuilding trust with communities of color in Denver. How will you do that specifically?
Yeah, so to me, one of the central changes that I plan to bring to the office, and I talked a little bit about this earlier in the show, is my community engagement piece. But it's not just about assigning prosecutors to neighborhoods to work with police. It's also about having community members be part of the office. We talked a little bit about a police accountability person. I also need to have someone who understands the school system and works with schools and juveniles to come in on staff. I really feel strongly about having someone with gang violence and gun violence nonprofit experience come in and educate and make sure that the office looks like the community we serve. I want to hire lawyers that reflect the diversity, but I want to make sure that if we can't find those lawyers, we also have people who have community engagement roles to really help community feel like they have a connection to the DA's office.
I heard you just the other day criticize a portion of what she has again said here, suggesting that if you can't find great attorneys of color, well, then just hire staff members to diversify your office. And you essentially said that was an abdication of your duty to actually truly diversify the prosecutorial force. Could you start there with your critique there and talk about that idea of how you see rebuilding communities of color's trust working?
So I think it is so important that we recognize that, of course, it is important to have diversity in staff, but it is crucially important to have diversity among the actual prosecutors in the office. And that means taking a determined effort to make sure that you're reaching out to the law schools, working with the specialty bars, the Sam Carey bar and the Hispanic bar and other bars and the Asian bars, to make sure that you're recruiting people into the office. And here's a crucial thing, that when they get into the office, that there's an environment that is inclusive enough that they feel welcome and they stay. Because it's often the case that you have diverse attorneys who come in and they don't stick around for very long, and that can't be the situation. While I was U.S. Attorney, we worked very aggressively to do that, and we had some success. Not as much as I would have liked, but it is a process. It's not something that happens automatically. You work on it. I speak Spanish fluently. I was an exchange student when I was in middle school. Reaching out to the community in a direct way, the Latino community, the Spanish-speaking community, is something I care about. And it also matters to me very much to be working in the Black community in the city as well as others, so that there is a constant exchange of information and that they know the DA, the elected DA, is present. Now, I will say this, one other thing that I think is important, and it's a place where I think Leora and I actually agree. It is important that we have people in the office who are dedicated community engagement folks across a wide variety of areas. There are community engagement people in the DA's office now, but I go back to when Bill Ritter was DA 20 years ago. He had a very full-fledged community relations and community engagement team. That's something that I would duplicate.
I
Please,
want to address
please.
that for
Yes.
a minute. You know, Kyle, I've been to so many forums as a participant, and I've heard elected officials and new leaders say things like, I want my office to reflect what the community looks like. They all say that. And then after they get elected, a year later, you go back to the town hall or the community, and they say, nobody applied for the jobs. No one applied. And I want to say that I recognize that, of course, we must do everything we can to recruit communities of color to come and be lawyers in the office. But being a lawyer in the office is only one job. And I understand why there might be some people from Black and brown communities that say, I can't be a prosecutor and ask for prison time. That's just not my role. Can I come in and advise on gun and gang violence? Yeah, I can do that. And that is where we have to be creative when we make change.
I want to talk about the. No,
And-
please go
and
ahead.
Can I just say,
Yeah.
I don't think it's impossible. I think we can do this. I think we can, in fact, get diverse prosecutors into the office, and I will move heaven and earth to make sure it happens.
I appreciate that back and forth, because I think you built on what I heard you say in previous forums and gives people an idea of where you are on that. An issue where you do have a disagreement is on the idea of supervised use sites or so-called safe injection sites. They've got a lot of different names. People know what they are. It's been brought up in the past. Leora, Joseph, you oppose supervised use sites or so-called safe use sites. John Walsh, you've shown kind of an openness to it, which is interesting because Denver's mayor opposes them vehemently. The governor opposes them. Democrats at the state legislature don't have the votes to allow a municipality to spin them up if they wanted to, but you've suggested that we try a pilot program. I haven't heard you say what that would entail. What does that look like?
Well, so two things. First of all, I'm not in favor of safe injection sites as things currently stand. So let's just start right there. What I am in favor of is that we do further research. And I say that because in Denver last year, 550 people died of drug overdoses. It is a public health catastrophe. My approach is simply to say, all right, let's explore whether or not we can, in fact, do further research to see whether a safe injection site could be implemented that doesn't hurt the community, that doesn't enable drug use, that gets people moving towards treatment and have it happen. And I'll tell you this, the National Institutes of Health have taken exactly that approach. Last year, they issued a grant and they started funding it to do research on pilot projects in both Rhode Island and New York City. I'm not confident that that can be set up 100% here in Denver, but I think we should explore it. We have too many people dying.
Yeah, I want to be clear. When you say research, people think about, academics sitting around a table.
You've
talked about pilot program. You're talking about a pilot program in Denver, and if you think that if it could be started here, you would be open to it.
It would, if it could be done safely, and that's the threshold that we have to do, that it's not going to harm the surrounding community and that we are careful about the way it's done. That's threshold for me.
What would be the harm in a pilot program?
Yeah, I worry about this topic a lot. We do have a real serious drug addiction and overdose death problem in Denver. Here's the issue. I think we need to do a lot of things differently. Naloxone has to be made available. Fentanyl strip testing needs to be made available. And I'd love to see Colorado and Denver in specific have more of a workforce based on peer coordinators, people with lived experience, helping people get into treatment. The goal has to be treatment. What I worry about is becoming a test city for legalization of hard drugs and having state supervised use of hard drugs and administering those. I don't think that that's safe. And I have not seen evidence that cities internationally in particular who've adopted that method have saved people and moved them into treatment.
You want a last word on this before we move on to some other things?
I just want to say something. I am not in favor of decriminalization of hard drugs. Let's just be very clear about that. That's part of the reason that I count me a skeptic on safe injection sites. But what we're doing now is not working. And everything that Leora said we need to be moving towards is actually happening now, and it's not enough. We need to be thinking broadly, and if we can set something up safely that shows a path forward, I'm in favor of that. That's the point, to figure it out and do what works.
Public perception tends to be that crime is worse than it is. A lot of reasons for that. I feel like I should acknowledge that, maybe in part because some local TV news stations focus on a litany of scary crime stories that they feed people. Some of that misinformation comes from political actors. like Leora Joseph, your former boss, Republican DA George Brockler, who pushed the narrative of a crime tsunami happening in Denver. What role does the DA have in pushing back on inaccurate narratives about crime in the city, whether they're coming from the media or political figures or anyone else? Leora Joseph.
Yeah, I think it's a hard job to push back on the media. And I think in particular, focusing on so many of the good stories, right? The successes, and when crime goes down, for example, auto theft has gone down slightly. I think we have to get that narrative out, and it's really important that the DA own those facts and make sure that they are able to express them and continue the narrative. The issue here is this, though, Kyle. When people don't feel safe, when people are victims of crime, and I've been meeting with so many people here in Denver who've had their cars broken into, who have felt accosted on a street, who've had their car stolen. We can't gaslight their experiences either. And I think it's really important that we have to give victims their voice. To say, it's not so bad, I don't think that's fair to victims. And I think that we also have to be really, really careful how we talk about that.
John Walsh.
So I think it's important for the DA to actually look at what the data looks like and respond to that and help educate people on that. But I think it's also really important to recognize that people's experience of a year or 2 years ago, or even 3 or 4 years ago, still influences their impression of how things are right now. And that's legitimate. That's how we all are. So it's not, sometimes you see stories nationally, it's like, well, why aren't people paying attention to the fact that crime has gone down? And I think it's a reflection of the fact that we had such a wave of crime in 2020 that people are still reeling from that, to be honest. And I know I have been. That's part of the reason I got into the race. The crucial thing for us to do, though, is to focus on where the problems still exist and to work with people who are experiencing them and try to address them. One of the things that I strongly believe is that to be an effective district attorney, you've got to listen to people. And I've gone around the city, I've done something like 80 meet and greets, and I've listened to people, and there are legitimate concerns out there. The DA needs to listen and act on addressing those.
A brief answer from both of you. Would you like to see the city of Denver increase its law enforcement cooperation with federal immigration authorities? John Walsh?
At the moment, I don't know that we need to increase that. I think we're in a position where the system as we are set up now is functioning well. I know that from the federal side as well. And so I would not ask for an increase in that. I would not.
Leora Joseph, increased cooperation with federal immigration?
I don't think we need to do that either. I think we agree on that. We agree on that.
Current Denver DA Beth McCann has not prosecuted any fentanyl dealers under the new state law that allows dealers to be charged with felonies if their drugs kill someone. Is that a failure? And whose failure? Is it the DA's? Is it the way the coroner is working? Is it the law itself? How do you view that?
Yeah, Kyle, I handled the first case in Colorado of an opioid dealer who caused overdose deaths of 4 young adults, even before the law came. And the reason I bring that up is we didn't have that law. We had to really use creative legal thinking to charge a manslaughter case, bring in some case law, some prior bad act 404B evidence, and really make a strong case the first time done in Colorado. Why am I saying this? When there's a will, there's a way. And I think we need to be working, all of us together. Now, whenever there's a new law, there's an element of training, there's an element of making sure we're all collaborating, understand the new law, and working together to build up a case. That's a lot of work, and it also involves being bold. It also involves saying, we're going to try this under the new law. We're making case law. Let's figure it out. Let's see how a jury responds. And it's okay if the first time isn't perfect. That is what we kind of need to do to change things up. We've got to take advantage of these laws because the traffickers, they're the ones ultimately responsible for these 500 overdose deaths we have. This is how we hold people accountable. We've got to try.
John Walsh, what do you make of Denver's inability to prosecute any fentanyl dealers under this new law?
Well, frankly, I'm a little surprised by it because I think it's an area that absolutely needs attention. There's a comparable federal law, drug dealing resulting in death, and that's the type of case that while I was U.S. Attorney, we did prosecute. So this is not new to me. I think what you need to be thinking about, and the ideal way to do this, is go up the chain a little bit. Go for the people who are sort of bringing the drugs in directly from the cartels, focus on them, and develop that case, whether it's with wiretaps or other investigative techniques, and bring a case for drug dealing resulting in death against the chiefs of the organization and take the entire organization down. I'm absolutely committed to doing that sort of work. It's the kind of work that I've led in the federal system. It's something that we can do here in Denver as well.
Like to wrap up with 2 questions about things that are outside of your control, which always seems very fair to ask you about, things outside of your own control. But still, as DA, you'd have a big voice on these things. So former Mayor Michael Hancock had his cross-agency downtown action team doing enforcement actions downtown and outreach. Mayor Mike Johnson has his Safe and Clean Downtown program. We're often talking about low-level municipal offenses that are not prosecuted by the Denver DA's office. They're handled at the city attorney's office. What's your general philosophy on how Denver should police or enforce or do outreach about the small things?
Yeah. So the small things, when I think about them, I think about people suffering on the streets. I think about it in 2 different ways. One, people who feel that there's a lot of dysregulated behavior and they don't want to come downtown, they don't want to work downtown, they don't want to go out to dinner, they don't want to go anywhere in Denver, they're not feeling safe. I have people, it's not just downtown, in all neighborhoods who get nervous walking their kids to school. That's not okay. But the main thing is, if we do nothing, what we're ultimately doing is ignoring people who are ill, people with severe mental illness and substance misuse disorder. We can't ignore. I really believe that mental health is health. And in the same way, I would never walk down the street or want my children to walk down the street, walk by someone who's bleeding from their head, and act like that's normal. We have got to make sure people are getting the help they need. And so, to answer your question with specifics, there are ways that the courts can help people get into treatment. It doesn't mean jail. It means using different kinds of commitment statutes. It means offering and having something called assisted outpatient therapy, which is being used in other jurisdictions to make a judge, not a criminal judge, monitor treatment. And that has shown great success.
John Walsh, how should Denver handle the low-level offenses that impact a community but wouldn't be handled by your office?
Well, I think you've raised an incredibly important issue, because to address these issues, we need to really have a complete collaboration with the city attorney's office, as you mentioned, with the DA's office, frankly, with service providers and with the courts, because it is the entire safety spectrum has to be handled. That's something I did as U.S. Attorney, working with DA's office, working with cities, working with people in the community. And one of the things that I would do right off the bat coming into office is sit down and make the DA's office an active partner with the city and with the city attorney's office, service providers in downtown, to develop a truly comprehensive, safe, clean, and vibrant downtown plan. The DA's office needs to be at the table, and I don't believe they are now. And that's something that I'd be absolutely committed to doing, so that you have essentially a spectrum of responses depending on circumstances that are the lower level offenses are involved. I'll also say this. It is absolutely the case that we should be expanding the so-called drug court that we have here in Denver, which addresses people who have committed crimes because of addiction or substance use disorder issues. The same is true. There's a small competency court, a mental health court here in Denver that is doing great work. And it addresses the issues when you have someone who has serious mental illness who is caught up in the criminal justice system because of that. We need to expand that as well. Those are programs that are crucial. They can be on that line between the lower level offense the DA's office doesn't handle and something the DA's office does. It's that kind of collaborative approach that I've spent a whole lifetime professionally working on, and that I would bring to this job starting on January 1.
Final question for both of you. The Denver DA can, if he or she chooses, be a very influential voice on statewide issues, things that are really outside of your control in your office. What is one such issue, a statewide issue, that you would lead on?
I would absolutely lead on the continued effort to make sure that our gun crime laws are effective and are strong enough to enable us to actually get guns off the street and to deal with people who are actually involved in violence with guns. I've spent a lifetime working on that issue. I responded as U.S. Attorney to the scene at the Aurora Theater shooting. It's something that I've seen up close and personal. It is a crisis that we're facing in this country. I believe passionately in it. I was testified in favor of the so-called red flag law back in 2019 that was enacted here. And I also testified back in D.C. in support of President Obama's gun violence package, after Aurora. These are things that I think we need to get our arms around, and I'm committed to doing.
2 quick questions then about your initial inclination on various things. If there's not going to be a national ban on bump stocks, should Colorado ban them?
I think the answer is absolutely yes.
Okay. How about so-called assault weapons? There's been growing momentum amongst Democrats at the Capitol. The governor's not on board with it. It hasn't gotten across the finish line. Thoughts?
So I think we need to be thoughtful about the so-called assault weapons, and I know this from my federal experience. Defining what an assault weapon is actually a really difficult question. I think what we need to focus in on is preventing the sales of weapons that are sort of military-grade weapons that can cause incredible harm. At Aurora, all except one of the fatalities in that shooting were caused by the AR-15 in that weapon. The other weapons that were used in that did not kill anyone. So it's crucial for us to recognize that those weapons are of a different character, but we need to be careful about how we define them, and we need to be careful about making that a forward-looking solution, not something that is taking away guns that people already have.
Thank you. Leora, Joseph, a statewide issue that you would look to lead on, even if it's outside your control.
Yeah, I think the number one issue that I would take on a legislative priority is bond reform. This is a critical issue that affects justice every day. We need a way that we can hold people accountable in jail before their trial, but we can't criminalize people for low bank accounts. We can't punish people differently because of socioeconomic factors. We need to look at ways that like Illinois and New Jersey are piloting new laws, and I think this is a key piece. I got a call from a friend whose a relative was murdered in a domestic violence incident right in front of the house in the middle of the day. And the defendant was found with $1 million cash in his backpack and passports. This person was bond eligible, even though he committed a first-degree murder in front of the children. We've got to find a way to hold people accountable when they commit violent crimes, repeat offenders, but we also cannot penalize bank accounts. That's not fair.
You do hear talk at the legislature about the idea of eliminating cash bail. Thoughts?
I think we need to figure out other ways. I think we need to look at ways that you can detain or release, a catch or release system. I think we also need to look at home confinement. I think we need to look at GPS. I think everything needs to be on the table.
Leora, Joseph, John Walsh, I thank you both for your time and for this discussion today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.